Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go over the basics of working with Knoll Light Factory. Let's take a look. So Knoll Light Factory is a Red Giant plugin that we can get by signing up for a student account from their website, and you'll get all the Red Giant stuff. I'm going to focus primarily on Knoll Light Factory right here, but do know there are many other useful effects that come along with the Red Giant suite. Okay, so a little bit about this scene. It's a 3D animation rendered. Okay, it is saved with an alpha channel. I'm going to assume everybody is comfortable and familiar with how to save out with that. And then I've also just added in a background here. Okay, and so really what I'm going to be doing is showing you guys how to use Knoll Light Factory in two different ways, kind of a beginning and a little bit more of an intermediate way. Okay, so the first way of doing this, as I said, is going to be kind of the beginner way. And so I'm going to start by creating a new solid, and I'm going to call this lens flare. Okay, it's black, that's fine. Now what I want to do is add the Knoll Light Factory effect to this lens flare. Okay, there it is. And if we want to be able to see the lens flare and get rid of the black color of our solid, then what we need to do is come down here to the very bottom, untwirl rendering, and check on unmultiply. Okay, and that will do that for us. And now we have our lens flare. And you can click on the light source location here and drag this to, wherever you want. Okay, this would be the property, which we can see right here, that you would animate if you want to move this lens flare kind of going across, part of your image here, whatever the case may be. All right, so that's the actual position information. We'll come back to the ability to use lights as well as the obscuration layer. Okay, I also want to point out we have basic controls like brightness, scale, okay, color, and the angle. All right. A couple of other things. I do recommend switching this from GPU to CPU, especially when you're going to be adding lots of flares, like hopefully we're going to be doing later to these lights. So GPU is great for a single flare, maybe even a couple, but I found CPU to be better when we're working with several lens flares. Okay, so that's kind of the basic, right? Is just being able to kind of move this where we want and then animate it. All right. From here, what we can do is come up here and click where it says designer. And this is where we can really customize this lens flare. And it's one of the things that makes this so powerful. So over here, we have this little arrow. You can click on it and it will bring up all the different presets that we have available to us. And there are a lot of different really, really good presets here. Okay, so you can choose whichever one you want. I like that they're kind of broken down by different types. So, a lot of different ones for, action or cinema. We also have several for motion graphics. Okay, so, just a bunch of different kind of presets here that we can use. And then we can also come over here to the editor and modify those presets or create our own from scratch. So these are all the different components that make up our lens flare here. And you can hide, solo to see what each does. And once you select one, its properties will be listed down here. So you can adjust the color, position, brightness, all sorts of really cool things. And in fact, if you click on this or even hover over it, you will see all the different built-in elements that allow us to really customize this and make it look exactly the way we want. Okay, so lots of different properties here. Okay, so once you found one you like in the presets, maybe customized it a bit, made it work for you, you can go ahead and hit OK. All right, and there we go. And I can move this around. Right, now we're seeing kind of the spread elements here. Right, really great part of it. And there we go. Once again, super easy to animate if I decide I want to do that. Okay, so let's say this is my lens flare. Okay, I've already talked about animating it. One other way we can animate it is in the behavior. You can choose kind of a preset here, whether you want it to blink, flicker, pulse, or strobe. Another good one is the angle. All right. And once again, it just comes down to what you're looking for. All right. Another really cool thing about this that kind of gets us towards the more advanced use of this is use of an obscuration layer. Right now, this lens flare is on top of everything. Okay. But if I want, I can have this lens flare be hidden if it was to go behind another layer. All right. Another way of saying this is I can make something on top of the lens flare. And that's where our obscuration layer comes from. We have different types. So if you're working with an image that has an alpha channel, you can just use alpha. You could also use an object buffer multipass as an obscuration layer, and you could just use luminance or inverse luminance for that. Since mine has an alpha, that's what we're going to be using here. Okay. So then what I need to do is tell it what layer I want to use is my obscuration layer. I'll choose my beauty pass. Nothing's going to change, but now if I start to drag this down kind of behind part of my logo here, you can see how it kind of tapers off. All right, it gets less bright. So that can be really, really powerful as well. Okay, keep in mind that can also be a problem if we're trying to, highlight, this edge here. I may not want to use that obscuration layer, but it is a really neat and powerful way of working with this. Okay. So that is really the basic part of this when we're using just the lens flare itself on top of an existing image sequence that we've rendered out. If we want to take this a step further, what we need to do is go back to Cinema 4D. So in this actual project, I've created some lights, right? Top and the bottom here. I've animated them, so they're going to move across. I've also placed lights in the stadium lights back here. Okay, and what we're going to be able to do is bring over just the lights and camera into After Effects, and we'll be able to use the 3D position of the camera and lights so that the lens flares automatically track and appear in the correct position. Okay, and that happens all by itself. Okay, so whenever you create a light, it's important that export to compositing is checked on. It is by default. The other important thing is to check on no illumination. Okay, because without this checked on, it's going to actually add lighting to our scene. Okay, we don't necessarily want the lighting from it to be added to our 3D scene. We just want this light as a placeholder so we can use it inside of After Effects. Okay, so really important to understand that. All right, and then what I'm going to do is go back into After Effects, and I'm going to import my Cinema 4D file. Okay, so by importing our Cinema 4D file, it's going to be treated like a piece of footage, right? No different than an image sequence. There are a lot of really cool uses for this, but there's also some really big limitations that you guys will talk more about in broadcast design if you haven't had that class yet. But still really, really powerful. What I'm going to do is drag my Cinema 4D file into my composition. Okay. I'm going to actually hide it because I don't want it to do anything. And I'm going to come down here and hit extract. And that's going to extract all of my lights. Okay. And that's a bunch of the stadium lights. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select all these, switch on Shy Guy, and then hide them. Because really, I'm just concerned with the light top, the light bottom, and my camera. Okay. And because I have my camera in here, these lights are in the correct 3D position. And so if we look, you'll see that they're moving across the top of the logos here, just like they are in Cinema 4D. Okay. And also, we can see that the lights I put in the stadium lights also are in the correct position and stay there as we update this. Okay, let me just reorganize this a little bit. All right, I really don't need the Cinema 4D file in here anymore now that these elements have been extracted. Okay, and now I'm going to come back here to my lens flare layer, and what I can do is come back here to the location and check use lights. Now, I want to be a little bit careful with this in this scene because I have a lot of lights. So I'll go ahead and turn it on, and nothing is going to happen. And what I can do is tell it what lights I want to apply this to based on the name of it. And they give an example of it here. Okay, I'm going to just type in top. And so what that means is it will be applied to any light that has the word top in the name of it. So it should just be this guy here. Now, I saw it come on barely, and it's my obscuration layer that's actually kind of messing this up. So I'm going to turn that off for now. And now if I scrub through this, you will see that it's now tracking with that light. Okay, so it does all the heavy lifting for us, which is really, really useful. Okay, so super cool. All right, I also want to point out you could have it use the light intensity, but since I didn't really deal with this inside of Cinema 4D, I'm not too concerned with that. I could also have it use the light color that I set in Cinema 4D if I did that, okay, which I did not. You can also use depth scale, which can affect the size of it. So for instance, in my scene, this light is closer to the camera than these. So Knoll Light Factory is smart enough to realize that and say, okay, this is going to be one size, but lights back here should be smaller because they're further away. Okay, and yeah, there we go. So that is a very easy way for us to use lights as kind of the position for our lens flare and have them track. My favorite thing to do when animating this is to animate the scale, not necessarily the brightness. So I'll set the scale to 0 here, hit the stopwatch, come a little bit later down the line, set this back to 100, or I'm sorry, 1 since it's scale, and just kind of do the same thing at the end. All right, set the scale to 0, go a little bit before it, set the scale to 1. Okay, so that way it should fade off. All right, as well as fade on. All right, if we just kind of ran preview that really quick, we can get an idea of how it looks. Now, overall, I like the way the majority of this flare looks, but I don't like these things and the way they're angled and how they're kind of going upwards. And so I probably would go back into the designer and make some adjustments to that. Okay, so that is a look at how we can use it on existing lights. And the great thing about this is now that I've done this, right, let's say I name this one top, I could do something very similar for the bottom. So if I duplicate this layer using Controller Command D, rename this bottom, okay, I can have it use all the same properties. The only thing I need to do is change the naming that it's looking for, and I'll switch that from top to bottom. All right, and so now I have both. They both already have scale animated, so really nice. Okay, in fact, if I had given them similar names, like maybe this is like Logo Light 1 and this is Logo Light 2, then I could have done this all just in one layer with only one Light Factory effect, which would also be very useful. Okay, so let's see how we can do it with the stadium lights, because things are going to get a bit tricky there. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is switch my render method to CPU, since I know this is going to get pretty heavy pretty quickly. And what I'll do is I'll just actually just create a new solid here. All right, add Knoll Light Factory back on, double check to make sure it's set to CPU here. And then for the light, I'm going to just type in stadium, since that was the prefix on all my lights. And this can take a second. Okay. All right. I'll also click unmultiply. All right. And let's see why this isn't working. Okay. Oh, use lights. pretty obvious. All right, so let's just go to something towards the end when we can see all these lights on screen. I don't want this to have to kind of re-render this too many times, because as you can see, it can take a while. So that is something to be careful of. Switching my resolution here from full to something, a little bit lower, like third, could certainly help, although now it's going to have to start that process all over again. So we'll give it a second to do that before we move on. All right, so you can see this is just way too overpowering, and so we can adjust the scale. Maybe it's the fact they're too big. All right, so that's looking a little bit better. All right, I'm also not a huge fan of the lens flare that's on here. Okay, so we can go back to the designer, and it just so happens we have some presets here for stadium lighting, and so we can give these a second to load. All right, so maybe I'll use like stadium, something like this. Hit OK. It's going to go through and add those now. It looks pretty good. I wouldn't mind, increasing the scale perhaps a bit. Something else that I've noticed when working with Knoll Light Factory is that it actually really prefers to be in 16 bits per channel as opposed to 8. The lens flares seem to just break down a little bit. And so this is looking pretty good. Okay, what I don't like though is that I have these kind of polygon shapes all the way around. Okay, and it's just because it's the exact same lens flare and it's not being rotated. And as far as I can tell, there isn't a way to easily do that inside of the actual effect. Have it, rotate each lens flare a little bit. Even if I adjust the angle, it seems like it does it on all of them. So really the only way I can think to do that would be to rotate the lights themselves. Okay, and if you have a lot of lights like this, that can be a little bit problematic. All right, but I can very easily remove these kind of shapes that make this look super repetitive. So I'll go back into my designer, and I'm looking for the single poly ones. All right, like that. Go ahead and hit OK. And there we go. Okay, so now once again, I could go into the behavior, maybe work with some of the looping behaviors to get a little bit more animation here. And at any point I can come back in and change these lens flares up. So maybe I don't like the top one. All right, so I actually am not a huge fan of that one for this particular example. So I'll go back to motion graphics. Hopefully these load here shortly, and I can choose like ambient. All right, and I don't like that part of it, so let's see if we can find it. All right, so let's maybe better just to do solo. That looks like it, so we'll hide it. Hit OK, and there we go. So that one looks good. I probably would scale it down just a bit. It looks a bit too large to me, and obviously now I would probably want to change the template on the bottom one. I think it was ambient, and yep, that's what I want hidden. So now we have something like this. Okay, and once again, all those lens flares are going to track, with the lights that they're applied to, and so that makes my life a lot easier, because I don't have to do that tracking. I don't have to animate the position of these lens flares. It's all happening, due to the light's positions. Okay. Last thing, the obscuration layer does work when we are applying it to lights, though it can be a bit trickier to work with. Okay, if I just go to the top one, kind of set up the obscuration layer the same way. So alpha, choose my beauty pass, and we'll see that top one pretty much disappears because it's primarily behind this object. And so, yeah, I can come through here and move it up, and we should see it kind of rebuild. Let's turn off the stadium light so maybe that happens a bit quicker. You can see how that's working. Okay, but the way these lights have their animation applied to them from Cinema 4D is there are keyframes on every single frame. So it can be a bit tricky to make adjustments to, though there are ways around it. Okay, So that's something to think about is obscuration works the same way, but you also need to think about how that relates to the position of those lights in regards to the geometry that might be blocking them, right? So the light is technically kind of behind this, so that's why we're not seeing it very well right now. And so maybe in this case, I don't really care enough for obscuration to try and fix that animation, get it to work. That is going to work, just fine for me. Okay, so it all just depends what you're looking for. But that's a quick look at Knoll Light Factory, a couple different ways we can use it. All right, hope you guys find that very useful and helpful, and also realize just how much more powerful and interesting things we can do with lens flares now that we can go beyond the After Effects stock lens flare effect.